welcome. This is the actual Center for Contemplative Studies in Westchester University, as opposed to the virtual center, which we have been running for 5 years. So this is our dates. Chance to show it off. We can get about 35 people in here on the floor doing yoga, body scan, or something like that. So it's a useful space for us. We're trying to get more and more students to come in and use our services. We run 2 programs a day for students, and then we teach it as well. So the computers over on the side there. Program specially built for us. The students come in, log in. They get one of 5 different questions about how it is for them at the moment. What's your muscle tension like? What's your thoughts like? How connected do you feel to the rest of the world? Things like that. And they answer a little slider. It's just a 1 to 5. And some cool graphics that goes with that. And then they do the same thing on the way out, so that we're trying to get a sense, track outcomes. Students after either a half hour or an hour of practice. So that's what we're doing. What I'd like to do, I think, is to start with some mindfulness practice. That's maybe will help us build a little community here. Nothing to think of it. Oops. So maybe if you have coffee, you might want to put a lid on. Sit here for see if you can find a comfortable way of sitting in these chairs. We actually auditioned a lot of chairs. These came out pretty good. You expect, particularly if you sit all the way back in the chair, go ahead and use the back and use the little lumbar dimple there. So, if it's comfortable for you, closing your eyes, and if it's not comfortable for you, or if you prefer not to close your eyes, you could simply look down towards the floor, let your eyes focus, go a little fuzzy. And coming into your body, coming into the sensations of sitting. And feeling your feet on the floor. Feeling your thighs and buttocks against the chair. Back against the back of the chair. So gravity is holding you here. You can just notice that fact. You're not going to float off. So there's really not a lot of work that you need to do to be here in this chair. There's not a lot of work. Maybe there's an opportunity for rest. So you could let the floor and the chair hold you, perhaps. Just feeling into your feet, your legs. And they come a little more towards rest. Your upper body rests on the chair. just be held. Checking in perhaps with your arms, your hands, where they're placed. Maybe where they're placed they could find rest. The gravity could hold them. Maybe if you notice your shoulders, let the weight of your arms pull your shoulders down. Bringing attention to your face. We have a social mask that we wear. Sometimes it's hard to know that it's actually something that we're doing. Maybe it's harder for the face to find rest. So most of us have our eyes closed, and if we don't, we're looking down, so this is not a social look. You might just allow your face to come to rest. The muscles follow gravity. So just sitting and knowing that you're sitting. Knowing your body sitting. And maybe you feel it breathing. So you've been doing that. So as you turn your attention towards your breathing, there's no need to change it, there's no need to do anything. Just notice that it's happening. Maybe notice where you feel it. Your nostrils, upper back, chest, belly. So where you're feeling your breath most vividly, you could just rest your attention. Very gently, quietly rest your attention. So it may be that, like a butterfly that's come to rest, your attention flutters off. When you notice that, that's great. You've noticed, you're present, you're in the moment, you're being mindful, and you could choose to return to resting your attention on the breath. Just noticing when your attention wanders off, when you're aware of that, it's a good thing. You're awake, you're here. Then you can come Return to the breath. Just going away and coming back in a friendly way. Maybe even in a leisurely way. No rush here. Just aware of where your attention is. If you need to choose to come back, you choose to come back to your breath. It's not that one side is right and one side is wrong. It's just a question of noticing. And so you might take a deeper breath in through your nose, out through your mouth. So, if your eyes are closed, maybe you could tilt your head so that you would be looking at the center of the circle on the floor, in the center of the circle. Opening your eyes when you're ready. And you could look up and see who's here. So many of you I know. Some of you I don't really. I doubt if you all know each other. Would spend a minute maybe going around and you could say your name. And if you'd like, you could say something about how it is for you right now. What's your experience? The tradition is to go clockwise. Dr. Gallagher.
I'm Chuck Gallagher, occupational therapist. Work with children with special needs. I've known Malcolm for a little over 5 years now, so we've done some work together. And I always like these meditations because it does bring me. I just realize how few times during the week I'm really present. I think I'm present, but a lot of times I'm not present. So it's always nice to be present. And it's nice to be able to do this in a group versus by yourself in the woods or the terrace or the deck. It's nice to do it.
Matt, student here, about to graduate. I had your class in December and earlier this semester, so this is kind of almost like a deja vu, smaller. It's early.
So some cobwebs.
My name is Bruce, and I'm a retired psychologist, and Chuck introduced me to Dawn, and I've been participating in these things for a while. One of the things I'm really struck by is how wonderful it is to have you lead a meditation as opposed to me doing it all myself. There's something about having you say things that I find really cool. One of the things I was really noticing is you're talking about the social mask that we wear. And I realize how difficult it is for me to relax my face just like that. So it's improvement.
I'm still a semi-retired software developer. I've been to one of these in the not too recent past. But, I have to agree with Bruce. And we'll check. It's different coming to these sorts of events and doing this as a group as opposed to trying to do it yourself. It's hard to get away of the other distractions in your life.
I'm Kathy, and I work with families and people with the autism spectrum. And I've produced a few people with all the autism experiences all on our own. And I'm here basically to help clear out my head because I need to wake up every morning with somebody to issue.
So, Pat, did that happen? Or what's going on?
But
Your present moment experience, did you get a little clarity?
absolutely.
Yeah.
It just helps because you have to go and seek it. If we don't seek it, we'll never come and find out.
I'm Charlotte, and I am a semi-professional singer, opera classic. And I've been through the mindfulness course at Jefferson. I've heard about this tonight. And, the thing that you mentioned about the face really struck me because I hadn't had that experience about the facade. You used the word, I don't know, maybe a
Mask.
Mask. And it felt really interesting to think about that in the way that it would kind of release. I must have experienced that as you were mentioning. So
I'm Brenda. I'm feeling grateful this morning for being able to take part in a group like this about this specific topic. I am a professional that works with special needs children, and I'm also a parent of special needs children. So very grateful to see a community of people like this and see what this movement brings to the group.
My name's Kathleen Messer. I work in North Philadelphia. I'm a director of integrated health medicine and mind, body, and mindfulness education, and I'm tasked with creating cultures of mindfulness in a diverse medical community. And so I'm very excited about this topic, and I'm feeling quite present and grateful.
My name is Melena Wilson, and I'm also an occupational therapist. I work with Chuck, who has introduced me to the center, and I was able to come to one lecture previously. And I am interested in mindfulness, and I've been exploring meditation on my own, which has been really transformative for me. And I feel really at peace and happy to be here today. I have been really struggling over the last week with the current events and just how polarized our society has become. And it's been a difficult week for me. So it's nice to be together as a group here this morning.
My name is Shane, recent graduate, was on my thesis committee since I moved on, and now I'm working in the mental health field as a coordinator and intake coordinator and a therapist. So that's the relevance to here. I too was thinking about my facial expressions. I inherited one from my father, I think, where he one time was dropping off dry cleaning, and a week later, the dry cleaner says to my mom, "Is everything okay with your husband?" She says, "Yeah, why don't you ask him?" The dry cleaning person. She says, "Well, he was in and he had such a pained expression on his face." And my mom says, "Well, he just always looks like that." And so I think I kind of do that too, where I carry everything in my face. currently I'm pretty present. Check engine light came on recently, so I'm kind of like fussed by that. But so like half present. Things come up. I'm like, what's going to happen with that?
That wasn't a metaphor.
So, leaving here could be a disaster, but I'm I'll be mindful and just call people in. It's fine. But staying, bringing it pretty relaxed, so more relaxed than I was coming in, so.
I'm Christine. I had your class about pretty long ago, about 4 years ago or so. It was the first class I took at Westchester. I really liked it. It was an 8-week mindfulness practice, and it was off campus at a Church of the Savior, or I don't really remember the name of the place, but I loved the setting, I loved the course, and we had to do a meditation for 20 minutes each day, and I really liked your CD. I found it very soothing, and I'm into yoga, so there was a yoga involved with it. I'm just glad I got your email to be here today.
I'm Michael. I'm caught between the tension of wanting to relax and realizing that Chuck started and the circle is coming all the way around here. So I was grateful that Gabriel Rocco taught me about mindful listening a few years back, where as people were speaking, we actually realized that we're planning our own talk and we return our spotlight of attention back onto the speaker and actually honor the person with our presence and hear what they say rather than be concerned about how we look or what it is that we have to say. Although, having been a product of Catholic school, and I love the Catholic schools, I think the nuns get beat up because they were really just doing in the 1960s what the behavioral scientists told them to do, right? When learning occurs when behavior changes. But I'm here primarily because I enjoy spending free time with like-minded and like-hearted people. I'll confess publicly, realizing that a group of people like this understands that there's trust in here. About 10 years ago, those like-minded and like-hearted people were a bunch of Italian guys drinking martinis at the racetrack. But what really tuned me into practicing mindful awareness, I had developed something called cluster headaches back in 2005, which are just a nightmare. So I realized that although I was suffering cluster headaches twice a day, I was ruining the rest of my time. So I actually began to experience the shift that the mindfulness people talk about, where you were able to, I want to get this right, stop living in an active thinking mode of doing and shift to an aware, mindful way of just being where you are. Because when you're able to do that, you can get up and go to class and teach rather than sit there and worry about the next headache that's coming. I do teach, and I've taught Catholic school for 37 years. I'm over at Malvern Prep, where I've been for 27 years, where Dr. Rick Coach now turned me onto this. I'm very grateful for that. You're probably sensing that I could talk forever and wishing that I shut up soon. But that's not true. So what struck me as you were going through your script was that I was comparing it to many other scripts that I had heard before. And what I was grateful for, I had never heard anyone speak about gratitude. And we've been teaching mindfulness-based awareness practice to children in math classes. And just to hear that gravity's going to hold you there, for me, it connected me to that scientific intellectual fact, and I found it very soothing as well. Hey, I just hear gravity's nothing I have to do. And I had never heard anyone speak of, and I do this someone says release your tension in your body, it's always in my jaw and my face. And I know it, and although I know it's there, I still have to be mindful to release it. And I thought it was brilliant when you said, because I never thought of it this way before, that when you're engaged with wearing a mask, you're doing something, you're not being. So thank you very much.
I'm Dawn Maison. I am an alumni of Westchester and a borough resident. And last semester I was coming to some of the meditations that the center has offered. I have been a practitioner of magnified healing, which is a type of meditation, since '97, and aware of other processes of mindfulness since '78. What I love about this is the sense of community. And I too was going to speak about, I love the reference to gravity. And I was so aware of my heart chakra being very full during that meditation.
My name is Debbie Dunn, and I work here with McCown in the health sciences and studies minor, and I teach stress management, and I've been here teaching it for 6 years. So I'm well aware of this practice, and I'm here because it's just a fabulous way for a professor that knows this stuff to actually be led instead of having to be leading it, right? It's really, you know how that works. It's just great, so it helps ground me. I live in Lancaster, and I travel here. So I came in here very, I've got to be early, and I have every buggy known to man. And coming, and when here comes a buggy, and you know how slow they are. If you've encountered buggies in Lancaster County, about 20 of them this morning. So it was a buggy, and I'm getting a little exasperated, thinking, oh, I'm going to be late, and then, I just said, I'm just going to get centered, and we'll be, and walked in here at 9 o'clock on the dot, so too bad for those buggies, so I got here in spite of it, but I feel grounded and centered, so this is a good way for a busy professor to spend their morning, just getting recentered, so I thank you for building the center and providing it for all of us, and I have a couple students here myself, too, so here's one of us.
Good morning. My name is Marcellus Council Jones. I'm currently a senior, about to graduate in December. This is my first time actually going to something like this, so I was very interested when I got the email from Professor Dunn, and I also talked about Professor McCown on Mondays. And I learned a lot throughout the semester about finding my inner peace and just learning how to relax, because this has been a very stressful semester. The last semester trying to finish everything, trying to start a career, trying to manage family issues and everything like that. So without their guidance, I'm not sure how I would be able to manage my breathing, meditation. I've never did that before until this semester, and it really has helped. Just take a half hour out of my day, turn off all the sound, just meditate, and just try to find myself first. And then after that, I'll be able to tackle all my problems. So I'm just very grateful to be here.
Okay. Here we all are.
I don't think you recorded, sir.
Pardon?
Oh, yeah.
I don't think you recorded, sir.
So I was so drawn into everyone's stories. So how am I? I'm feeling like it would be great just to do some more practice and talk about it, but I put out this thing where I have to make a talk, so I guess I have to make a talk. I have to bring my energy up to do that. So I'll do that. And it's a long talk. I did this, was it yesterday? Yes, it was yesterday. I did this for the Taos Institute, which is a group of scholars that I'm associated with. Have calls that are international, so I had somebody from Colombia, somebody from Spain, 2 people from Canada, a couple of Americans, and I sort of walked through this. This Taos Institute is a group of scholars who work with an idea used to be called social constructionism, Now it's called relational constructionism. So you'll start to see this perspective revealed. Ken Gergen, who spoke here in the spring semester, is sort of a centerpiece of that. And so I used some of his thinking. He was my dissertation advisor, so I kind of understand his thought a little bit. So you'll watch this difference. The thing I want to say is that what I'm going to present to you, what we're going to hopefully talk about, is an entirely different way of thinking about ourselves and community. So, you know, we have something that we swim in. And so we're going to have to swim up to the surface and take a gasp and see if we can possibly see the world differently. It may be difficult. So we need to take a break, a couple of breaks. We can do that. We'll just see what happens. Y'all game? Yeah. Okay. Inside. So I have some intentions behind what I'm going to say. I won't say they're objectives necessarily, but they are intentions. So my first one is we have this discourse about mindfulness practice, about meditation, that it has to do with getting in touch with my inner self, or being with me, being inside. And you know, the Google corporate meditation program is called Search Inside Yourself. Okay, so this really is how we talk and think about it. It's hard to get out of that. But what if we actually don't search inside? What if we don't have an inside? What if being related to others is what we have? What if that's it? What if our relationships are the key to everything? That's what I want to posit here. So if that's true, then the possibilities for mindfulness, meditation goes far beyond just wellness, recovery, those ideas, but actually moves into the relational dimension and possibly community building. So maybe we can change how we're thinking and how we're practicing. I don't know if we change how we practice. We'll talk about that, but maybe it could change how we research these things, which is focused almost entirely on the outcome for the individual. So what we need to do is think about what we're doing when we're learning mindfulness. So not so much when we're practicing, but how do we get this? Where did it come from? Where does it go? Okay. So there's a key move to it, I would say, that sort of distinguishes mindfulness from other forms of meditation practice. So if we're trying to learn this key move, how much other stuff could we actually learn in an 8-week course, which is the standard, quote, intervention? You have 27 hours if you include the 8-hour or 7-hour practice day, which you're just doing practice. How much can we really learn? What can we do in that? And so I'm going to say that what we're doing for those 27 hours is that we're steeping in a space that we create together, or that we co-create. And so if, as we're learning this, we're not learning self-transformation, what are we learning? What is happening? It's not about the inner self. See, we have gestures for it, we have everything, but nobody can prove that it's there. So then I want to talk about how this leads us to some kind of a sense of an unintentional, even an unremarkable community, because it's a community that we don't remark on. So like I say, this is a little bit different than our normal way of thinking about these things. I will try to take it bit by bit. We'll see where we go. So you all know that mindfulness is enormously popular. You run into it everywhere. This was January 2014 in Time magazine, and there are plenty of other covers that one could show, and plenty of people that one could point out. And so, how did we get there? So this was one of the questions that Ann Harrington tried to answer, for those of you who were at that talk. But really, there was a legitimation process that went on. It was based on what we need in our society because of how we talk and think, which is we need to have a scientific basis for it. It needs to be secular, and it needs to be scientific, or we're not going to talk about it in general. Okay. So in order to do that, in order to do the legitimation part and make this possible, we needed to adopt the prevailing diagnostic system. We needed to buy into what the psychiatric and psychological community was purveying. We needed to accept the randomized controlled trial format that we use to investigate pharmaceuticals as the way to do this, as the way to develop an evidence base, which meant that we had to accept a reductionistic worldview and an individualistic worldview. We're looking at the outcomes of individuals. This is not necessarily where these practices came from. No matter what kind of route you try to take to them, whether you take a route to the east or you take a route to the west, that's not necessarily what's going on, but it's what we needed to do to make these things make the cover of Time magazine. So, and finally, the participants, the people taking the courses, needed to submit themselves to the treatment by and surveillance by professional experts. So suddenly now there are people who know more than you. They're going to tell you what to do. And soon, or actually right now, we're working on certifying them. And so there's a part of me that says, you know, when you start to solidify a discipline out of something that was just happening and something that was very free, you start to freeze it. And so as we certify people, it's going to be, this is how we do it and no other way. And this actually, to me, stops some of the potential for growth. I don't think that any of these things are, horrific, because we need this, and we're helping a whole lot of people. A lot of people are really finding value in what it is that we do. But I think that we also need to, as mindfulness folks, sit with the losses that we're, incurring as we continue to push this forward. So I am a contrarian. That's just how it is. And that contrariness comes from not so much an interest in reductionism or individualism which is where we live. It's that water that we're swimming in. It's really hard to see out of it. So let's see if maybe we can see outside. So one of the misdirections in this is this inward focus idea. You won't find the scientific literature supporting a focus on the outside, with the exception of a really nice study that was done by Zach Email and some other folks in looking at what is the effect of the other members of the group on the people in the group. So they had really nice data. They had 60 groups that they had outcome data on, with 600 subjects. So that's not a bad sample, really, to run some statistics on. So they built a statistical model and they factored out everything they could think of, including the effect of the teacher, including the effect of the room. And what they had left then was, they hoped, just what's the effect of the other people in the group on the outcome of the individual. So again, it's the outcome of the individual, because they weren't looking at the outcome of the group and how we can measure it, how we have to think about that, and so all of that creates a huge problem. But this idea of what effect did these other people have on me? What they found was that statistically, there was 7% of the variability in outcome had to do with the other people. 7%. It doesn't sound like a lot until you know that in individual psychotherapy, 5% of the outcome, or the variability in outcome, has to do with the relationship between the psychotherapist and the client. And so that starts to make it more interesting. If you build a model, there are a couple of models, and I could be technical for you if you want, but I don't think it's necessary. So if you build a model at 100%, you find that in individual psychotherapy, that 5% accounts for 30% of the curative factors, that relationship therapist-client. The only thing that's larger is what we call client factors, which is just what people do anyway in their lives, right? So that's 40%. So if you look at this 7% in terms of that kind of a model, you find that 40% of the curative factors in mindfulness-based intervention have to do with the other people in the room. To show you how stuck we are in our individualism and reductionism, this study was published in 2008. No one has even attempted a similar study. And nobody's applied for a grant to look at that. So we're really stuck looking at things individualistically. So there are a few qualitative studies, but really not many. You know, there are probably, 12,000, something like that, meditation studies. Qualitative studies of mindfulness, at any rate, there were 17 the last I checked. They're all individualistic. They're all looking at individual outcomes. They don't ask, what was it like? They don't ask, how was it to be part of the community? Those questions don't come. So there was one study of the teacher's role. And what they found was, in talking to mindfulness teachers, that although some teachers are aware of the importance of the group, that might be an underestimated factor, both in training, and this is mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, and it might need more attention in training teachers. So even just somebody within the discourse looking at it said, I think there's more going on in the group than even the teachers are allowed. There's a misdefinition too, because we look we've been trying to define mindfulness for scientific use for a very long time. We're trying to operationalize mindfulness. What is it that we're doing? What is it that's happening? And scientists, philosophers, religious folks have been trying to say, what is mindfulness? And I want to say from my perspective, from my relational constructionist perspective, that it's just silly to be saying, oh, well, what is it exactly? And let's define it and then we can go give it out. Because nothing works that way, for one thing. Oh. There was it's now a book, it was an issue of a journal, Modern Buddhism, Contemporary Buddhism, that looked at these definitions of mindfulness. And they all revolved around sati and, Sanskrit, Pali words and how they translated and all this, which is a lot of smoke and mirrors and storm and drang and all that kind of stuff, but doesn't get you anywhere. So I want to say that from my perspective and from the perspective of relational constructionism, we say, along with Wittgenstein, that a word is defined in the way that it's used in a form of life, in a community. So what is it that we're talking about? What is it that we mean when we're saying mindfulness? We mean what it is that we're experiencing, and we all come to sort of understand that and know that. So really, mindfulness isn't to be thought of as a skill or a mind state that we come to own, and it's better considered as mindfulness is what we come to agree on that mindfulness is and what it is that we practice together. Okay. So if this becomes our view that it has to do with our community of practice, then it's not just about me. Then it opens up again to this idea of justice and care in community. So I like the language of this statement, which is a typical kind of relational constructionist statement. Mindfulness is a relational accomplishment of the group that learns it. So, the experiences of people in an 8-week group are different every time. Otherwise, I would have given up trying to teach this stuff long ago because it would be boring as hell. Okay? It would be terrible. It would be always the same. So it's not. People say different things. We don't have a textbook. We don't study textbook. Right? What we do is we have people's experience as our text. And so as the class goes on, we refer back to people's experience, like, so-and-so's second raisin from the raisin exercise, what they noticed there, what that insight was. That kind of thing becomes how the community comes to understand mindfulness. So what is it that we're trying to understand? Being as we say, being as we only have 27 hours together, what is it that we're trying to learn? We're trying to learn the key move of mindfulness. We're trying to learn what happens. And so, to learn mindfulness, we generally start with a little seed. And that seed might be one of John Kabat-Zinn's statements about what mindfulness is. At least this is true. Mindfulness-based stress reduction, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. So paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. Now we have to see what that means in practice among ourselves. What do we find about it? This is not the job of the teacher to deliver. It's the job of the group, which includes the teacher, to realize, bring it. The definition is in constant flux as things unfold. You hear that for the first time on purpose in the present moment and non-judgmentally. Okay, fine. What am I bringing to it? As the course unfolds, as experiences happen and are shared, it becomes more sophisticated understanding. It becomes a different understanding. It's probably not the same understanding. It may not even be the same understanding among members of the group, but it's trending that way. So, out of in the present moment and non-judgmentally comes guidelines for how we talk about things. We are talking about them mindfully. We are talking about our experience mindfully. And so we remind people that nobody in here is broken, and so nobody needs to be fixed. So this is a very different situation than most people encounter. This is the transformative thing that does come up again and again and again in descriptions and in the qualitative work, is that I'm treated differently, I feel differently, the space around me is different, because nobody's interested in my diagnosis, nobody's interested in what's wrong with me. This is most true of mindfulness-based stress reduction. It's less true of mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, but that comes out of a cognitive therapy place as well as a mindfulness place. So, the more the people together have in common, kind of, the more we can identify with the pathology, we can identify with our label. But what we're hoping for is freedom from being pathologized and freedom from being under surveillance. And freedom from putting ourselves under surveillance, for heaven's sake. Which is what we tend to do, particularly if we're ill, particularly if we've been diagnosed with an illness. Oh, I wonder if it's coming back. I wonder if it's going to get worse. I better watch. That's not the freest way of living. How do we get out from under this surveillance, which we can't seem to, there aren't any cameras in this room. But there are cameras all over campus even. So, we live in a surveillance state at this point. And our medical and mental health care system is a system of surveillance. This is a respite from it. Mindfulness classes are a respite from inner and outer surveillance. So this attitude then is that key move of the pedagogy, key move in what we're learning. We're learning to roll out the welcome mat, as John Kabat-Zinn puts it, for our experience in the world. Okay, here. Saki Santarelli, who took over running the center at UMass from John, talks about it as hospitality and really actually uses the Abrahamic tradition to talk about hospitality and what it means and deep spirituality involved in making a place for the stranger, making a place for the other. So there are some possibilities here, sparks, yes. And so in the co-creation of mindfulness in the classroom, there's a way of being together that has this freedom to it, that has this openness to it, that is hospitality, that is rolling out the welcome mat, that is welcoming whatever's. That's really our job in the group. Whatever people present for. So I named this in a book that I wrote called, I named it The Ethical Space. So it is a place in which we are, in which these things can happen. And so perhaps the community can develop in that way. This is a shorthand way of talking about the ethical space. So there's actually 3 layers here. There's a layer of vertical lines, there's a layer of horizontal lines, and there is this gray tone in the background. So we'll talk about each one of these. So the first thing is, that you would notice as you walk into a classroom is we do stuff. What do? We pay attention to the present moment. The way we get there, the avenue for that is the body. So paying attention to what does it feel like right now. What did we do in our meditation? What's happening in my face? What's happening in my shoulders? I mean, we could move that into what's happening with these thoughts. We could move into what's happening in these emotions. And the body is what keeps us grounded. The body is what keeps us in the present. So we're very corporeal, which is very unusual. We don't often sit around and talk about what does it feel like in your solar plexus right now? How is your breathing? Do that at a cocktail party? It might be kind of fun, but but it's really not that much a part of our social way of being together. I'll take the second one next. As we're watching that, as we're watching what's happening in our body, we're also watching that it's changing all the time. We're seeing that it's changing. We're seeing that our emotions change. We're seeing that our thoughts are changing. We're watching that happen, pointing that out, and noticing, maybe is there meaning I'm getting out of this? Maybe I'm learning something as I watch these things go on. So we'll name that contingency. Everything is contingent. My experience now is going to be different now. Even. So changing. Watching it and having that be a good, having that be a value in our dialogue. And then finally, because nobody's broken and nobody needs to be fixed, the way you make meaning out of your experience is the way you make meaning out of your experience. I don't know the meaning of your experience. I might be able to ask you some questions, but I don't. You have to come to that yourself. And so the entire community needs to be open. We need to be a cosmopolitan community. We need to be accepting of whatever arises, whatever appears. For that reason. We have this other dimension, things that you wouldn't be able to notice until you start to analyze. So there's a non-doing dimension. So we're not pathologizing. We're not saying, oh, you're here because of this. We're saying, oh, you're here to investigate your life just like we are. So we're not pathologizing. We're not being hierarchical. The teacher isn't saying, I know your experience better than you. If they are, they're not really much of a teacher. Right? That's not what it means to teach. What it means to teach is to draw. And then finally, we're not using the practice like, if you do this practice, you will get better. We're using the practice as, if you do this practice, you will do this practice. What's your experience of it? Okay? The minute we instrumentalize it, the minute we say, 20 minutes a day, just do this, here it is, we've closed down all of the potential avenues for you to make meaning yourself. Does this make sense? How do we do that? How do we hold that kind of space? We hold it with that, what comes out of that little statement of John Kabat-Zinn's of non-judgmental. That non-judgmentally isn't a cold non-judgmentally, it isn't just a, okay, I'll react. It's, in his phrase, rolling out the welcome. It's hospitality. It's what I label it as friendship. It's being friendly towards your experience and the experience of others. So friendship in Aristotelian terms. Any questions? We need to stand up and shake our silly hand.
I was thinking of how compartmentalized it is. So a lot of the times we want, just what you just said about living this way, a lot of times we almost want, like, if you do these 10,000 steps, you will blah, blah, blah. If you do this, you will lower your blood pressure. If you do this, so there is that kind of draw, like,
yeah,
that will do that. So, and then the more I practice, I see that game that I'm playing. So if I get all my notes done, then I'll be free. If I get all,
dream on.
Right,
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
It's awesome.
If I do this, and so it's
yeah.
it's really interesting to see how that mind, that game that we've been playing all along with it.
And so, you know, to go back to this mindset thing that we're playing with, you know, what is it that we lose when we start to instrument this? Just pointing at some of the things that we lose this week. What is it that we lose when we label ourselves, I'm a depressive? Right? What have I lost? Everything in between.
Thank you. That was a great point for me as well, because I was thinking that, well, one of we lost, Tara Bra has written about the trance of unworthiness that we come out of school system with. We feel terrible about ourselves. And if you think about it, we are teaching kids how to treat word fallacy, which is a fallacy. If I do this, if I put this much work in, then I will get honors at the end, or I will get to go to this university. And the fact of the matter is that's not the truth. Right? That's your concept of non-instrumentality.
None.
Thank you.
And yet, we have all this research that's based on specific time, right?
Oh,
I mean,
sure.
yeah.
Well, you know, and here's the thing about that. You know, we say, oh, well, 20 minutes a day or 45 minutes a day. You don't know, actually, the actual scientific studies on compliance and outcome really are ambiguous. It really doesn't say that, and it could be that compliance is just a marker of existential need. You know, it still might not work out that, oh, it's because I practice this much.
Is there anyone who might question the validity of the research based on that kind of thing? Like, are there groups that will?
I question everything all the time.
Okay.
I know that something happens with people.
Yeah.
I know that anecdotally. I know that through the little bit of qualitative work that's been done and the qualitative work that we're trying to do here, you know.
But
something happens.
Yeah. No, I
But
understand.
what causes that to happen? I don't know. And that's one of the things that fascinates me about this whole idea of, well, 40% of the curative factors in this are the group. Other members of the group, as far as we can tell. Wow. Does being in community change us? Does being in the kind of community that is quiet and non-judgmental and cosmopolitan change us? Does it heal us? To use like a big giant flag word. whatever that would mean. Does it? Is that what's going on? I don't know, I'm not prepared to.
I was wondering, you chose to select this as ethical space. Can you get a little bit more clarity on why?
No, it was actually an inquiry that I was making, that was my dissertation. And, you know, no one was interested at the time that I started. I started in like 2010. Nothing had been written about, well, you know, as a mindfulness teacher, what are my ethical responsibilities? What's happening? We didn't have a code of ethics. We don't have any of that stuff. So I tried to understand from inside, as a practitioner, what was actually going on and how ethics would look, how even morality would look inside the group. And so what I did was to analyze what it was that we were doing and what it is that happens. Because frankly, I don't know your reading of history, but I look at history and I see that we have all these wonderful ideas about what our ethics should be, but I don't see us necessarily adhering to them. You know, I'll talk about this a little later, but there are first order moralities. There's ways of being that we have together that you don't transgress. Nobody's going to get up and tap dance and sing right now while we're having this conversation. It's like you just don't do that. That isn't part of the morality that we're sitting in. So if somebody does, then I have to do something about that. But you know, there you go. So to me, you don't have an ethics that you apply 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's do this. You have a way of being together. And frankly, there's very little scandal around the mindfulness-based interventions. So there's something about them that has some sort of inherent quality that allows the people who are together to be together in a way that seems satisfactory to them. I won't go any further than that because I don't know. I don't know how it lines up with any particular other set of ethics. I know that as a social worker, I feel fine. And if I refer to my ethics, I feel fine in the group, but I'm not referring to my social work ethics. I'm just being what I'm being in the moment. So I'm going to actually talk about all this. You want to get up and get a cup of coffee? Do that. Bathroom break. Bio break. So maybe we can just practice for see if you can drop into your body. Because these kinds of discussions and my kind of talking can take you away pretty easily. Let's see if you can come back. Find your feet on the floor. Find your body in the chair. Find that sense of gravity just holding you. Of your breath just happening. So if you're a cat owner or a cartoon watcher, you sort of know what it's like when a cat is watching a mouse hole. So maybe you can just be the cat watching your breath. Sense of relaxation and alertness at the same time. mind wanders away. Wonderful. An opportunity to wake up, know where you are, know what's happening. To make a choice to come back, sit next to perhaps hole again. You might take a deeper breath in through your nose, out through your mouth. And open your eyes. I wanted you to be calm because I'm going to click to this slide. So this is material that I don't usually talk about. So this is for me. This isn't for you. You don't have to read this. Okay. So what I want to say about the ethical space, first of all, is that this isn't some kind of a cognitive space, and it's not a metaphor. I mean the real thing. I mean the real architectural volume where you're sitting. I mean the place where you are, the people and its furnishings. That's what makes the ethical space, that it's real. That's what allows, or that is the space in which we can roll out the welcome mat for our experience. There's an atmosphere that comes along with that, and you probably know that. You walk into a room with a bunch of people, and you know how that space feels. You go like, oh, this is friendly, this is cool. Or you go like, wow, there's something really not quite right here, you know? We can talk about these things. That's weird. We can talk about what it's like in a room when we're together. We can sometimes agree on what it's like in a room when we're together. So, a definition of the atmosphere would be an undivided relationship between self and other. That's what we're able to feel into. So what would that be like? How would you get there? And why don't we have words for it? We don't have words for it because we're a very individualistic culture. My Korean friends have several words for the group and how it is together and the feeling of the group. Does anybody have any words? Anybody have one?
I think Ubuntu is one that the South Africans use.
Ubuntu? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, again, it comes out of a different culture, but not ours, but yeah. So, you know, the collective cultures, I think, experience some of this stuff differently because they do have language around it and they are more used to thinking about it. You know?
I would say collective conscious, and then there's a collective unconsciousness.
But yeah,
not...
we've been watching that recently.
Okay, yes, yes. But I see that, that's just something that came to mind with what we were talking about before the break, that, and I guess, you know, for me, I'm a behavior analyst, so that's why I ask about how do other people see it. You know, the 40% I find really interesting. So I tend to look at behavior, and when you look at single behavior and group behavior, there's, to me, there's a collective consciousness that happens that creates the expectations of why people aren't going to get up and dance on the floor. So,
yeah.
So, anyway.
I notice it in classrooms, especially like when I teach back-to-back classes, and a 40 walk in, a group of 40, teaching, and there's special energy in the collective consciousness in that group, they leave and a whole nother 40 come in. And in an instance, like a whole different shift, a whole different energy, a whole different, are you talkative, are you not, are you going to participate, are you not? It's really a dramatic change. I know that's huge, yeah.
Yeah.
Huge.
Just different.
The word agape is coming to mind, and it's a word I haven't used in many years. I seem to remember it as a shared family space or shared family meal. The idea of community gathering and sharing. I don't know if anybody's familiar with the word.
Yeah.
If I'm getting it right.
It's a positive word.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a positive mood or mode in which people are together.
It's one of the Greek's 4 words for love, and it's
Yeah.
the most powerful,
Yeah.
authentic, actual love.
Yeah.
I've heard people use the word vibe.
Yeah.
Vibes are good.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's the vibe here? So, but we have those conversations we can talk about. Those of us who would use a word like vibe. Talk about these things. I think we may already be a little bit, more towards the collective, or at least outside of the mainstream individualism. Again. Okay. So, as we're talking from now on, when I start to talk about participants in the group and things like that, maybe you can start to think that they're not individuals. Maybe you can take some of the boundaries off them and start to feel into the group and realize that they're feeling into the group, that there is a sense of undivided relationship between self and other, that there is a connection to the other that those participants have, whether it's acknowledged or not. So in the Society of Friends, Quakers, the meeting for worship is silent, waiting for the moving of the Spirit. And so it's not waiting the way we think of it, like in the bank standing in line. Okay, that's what we hear when we hear the word waiting. The waiting that they mean is the older use of the word waiting, where I wait on the princess, I wait on the king. I am standing there and I will respond when prompted. That's what I mean. So it's not our kind of waiting that we usually think of. Okay? So in the practice of waiting as a community, special times come when, and here is a description of a gathered or a covered meeting. A blanket of divine covering comes over the room, a quickening presence pervades us, breaking down some part of the special privacy and isolation of our individual lives and bonding our spirits within a super-individual life and power. An objective, dynamic presence which enfolds us all, nourishes our souls, speaks glad of unutterable comfort within us, and quickens in us depths that had before been slumbering. The burning bush has been kindled in our midst. We stand together on holy ground. So here's a sense of a group mystical experience as a group. So just as kind of a touchstone for this, I mean, there are 20,000 things I could have chosen. I chose this one, probably because I teach a retreat at Pendle Hill, which is a Quaker retreat center here, and that's where I started to hear about this stuff. So what we're doing then is we're steeping in these courses in this ethical space that maybe sometimes approaches what Thomas Kelly was talking about. So, my friend Ken Gergen, in his sort of examination of our relational being, says that what we have here is a confluence. It is not a group of bounded individuals. It is people who are relating in this other way. We are mutually defining each other. And as we're steeping in that, we're steeping in the ways that we are together. And I mean that physiologically. How is it that we're sitting? What are our expressions like? How do we speak? All of the things that are important in being together. We come away with potentials for being and acting in certain ways. The more we steep in that kind of situation, the more we may be able to bring that out in other situations. So it becomes part of our, what Ken would call, multi-being. So he says we're not these individuals, we're made up of all these potentials that we gather from the relationships that we're in. So those of you who teach, and there seem to be a lot of us in the room, you know, there are certain potentials that we have our students living within, that our students are living in together. They're steeping in that. They're learning how to be together. What is it that they're actually taking in? What are those potentials? Is it something that we think about that much? So, the quote from Ken, in sum, all meaningful relationships leave us with another's way of being, a self that we become through the relationship and the choreography of co-action. So when we're together and we're acting together, we learn to do that. We learn to treat each other in a particular way. We learn to either roll out the welcome mat and be cosmopolitan with what the other people are offering, or we learn, no, that's wrong. Let me tell you what right is. Right? I mean, just to put it in the classroom, those are two different ways of being. So from these three sources, we emerge with enormous possibilities for being. And those possibilities may be anything. We're not putting them on some kind of value spectrum. This is good, this is bad. We're just saying this is what people's multi-beings are made up of. This is what I'm bringing into this situation. So how is it that we steep and what's going on, and how do we reinforce that space that we're in? So this requires a little bit of neurophysiology. This is one way of talking about it. It's not the right way of talking about it, and it's not even necessarily the best way of talking about it. But it's a way of talking about it that our society, our culture respects. This is the scientific way. Nothing that we don't already know. The discovery of mirror neurons really told us nothing that we didn't already know, but mirror neurons are the neurons in your motor cortex that pick up the motions and intentions of others. And I use that with a capital O because you do the same thing with your dog. You do the same thing with a rolling ball. Your brain picks up what's happening there or what is about to happen and plays it for you in your body. So when you look at someone's face, you're present your mirror neurons are trying on their expression and bodily attitude, and you know how they feel. I know there are also a bunch of therapists in the room. Somebody walks in your little room with the box of Kleenex and the dead plant, and you know what's going on with them, right? You know how they are. You're reading their minds in their body. As we were talking about at the break here, sometimes they don't know, and you know, right? Because they're not aware of what's happening in their body. You're feeling it. I see some nods from some other practitioners. So yeah, we have this kind of possibility available to us. It comes from that. We also have a resonance circuit in the brain. You could read about that if you want. I'll give you citations if you want. I'll give you this paper if you want. This is actually, I'm talking from a chapter that I wrote. So, what happens when we're relating with someone is our brain gets in the circuit with them. We attune to them and how they are. This is, I don't want to say primitive, but this is very basic. It goes back to the relationship of the caregiver to the infant. We look at the baby, and the baby looks at us back, and we start to mirror each other. We start to relate to each other. I giggle, you giggle. You look sad, I look sad. Then I change my face. Maybe you change your face. You've probably done that with an infant if you've had one in your arms for very long or very often, right? We move in that way. It's really cool. It's how the young one learns to regulate itself, because we can regulate it from outside. This is that process. It's speculated that is the same process that is involved in the meditative process, that we're doing that with ourselves. Because we're reading not only the present moment, but the intention. So I breathe in, my mirror neurons are saying, who's going to breathe out? And so I do, and so I start to quicken this resonance circuit. And so we're actually building that circuit that is built between the caregiver and the infants, that helps the caregiver to, or the infant to regulate or co-regulate. So the being together part is really kind of important here. So, got that? So I want to make one more move before we try to see how this actually works. So, a neuroscientist named Stephen Porges has a theory called the polyvagal theory. And his work has been on the brainstem for his entire career. He's looking at the brainstem, the autonomic nervous system, you know, essentially those things that we don't think about but that are going on all the time, our breathing, all those kinds of things, our heart rate, when we go into fight or flight, when we freeze up because of fear, that's all moderated there, and it comes through the vagus nerve. So the vagus nerve is attached to the heart, comes down, and it slows or speeds up our heart rate. That's kind of the major thing that people look at. So when you start to talk about heart rate variability and those kinds of things that are kind of hip right now, that has to do with this vagus nerve. So we have two vagus nerves. We have an older vagus nerve that belongs to sort of our reptile being, our reptile brain and our reptile being. It's non-myelinated. It's actually slower than the other one, which is the myelin sheath on the nerves is what allows the nerve impulses to travel faster. So what Porges says in looking at this in watching animals, people, whatever, what you see are 3 different responses. When you are threatened and it looks like you are going to die, this is a threat that we would consider traumatic. Okay? What happens is we go into this reptilian mode, which could actually stop our hearts. We could actually die. It usually does change the heartbeat considerably. Drop it out, bradycardia happens, and we just freeze. Lots of stuff happens in our brain too. So when people are traumatized, this is one way of thinking about it. A traumatic experience is this kind of shutting down, which has an effect cognitively as well as in the body. That's the first one. The second one is fight or flight, of which we are all well aware. Right? So the racing heart, et cetera, et cetera. What Porges says is that, okay, those are 2 levels of fear. Right? What happens when we feel safe? He says we have a physiological reaction to being in a safe environment. So, moderated by this newer vagus nerve, comes down to our heart. It also innervates our neck, throat, organs of speech, ears, and eyes. When we feel safe, when we walk into that party where everybody is cool, and we go like, wow, this is great, I love this. What happens to us physiologically is our eardrums are actually, let me start with the eyes. So our eyes open a little bit wider so that we can gather more light, see people more clearly, see what's going on. That opening of our eyes actually tunes our eardrums differently. We're tuned to the frequency of the human voice. Dangerous frequency to be tuned to because it's in the middle of the high noises that our predators make and the low noises that our predators make. You don't really want to be there that much unless it's safe. We get all kinds of really good muscle tone in our organs of speech, our neck, throat, larynx, pharynx, lips, whatever. So we're ready to listen. We're ready to talk. And we're ready to see what other people have to offer us. So he calls it the social engagement response. Here's the cherry on top of it, is that when we have this response, we have a release of a particular hormone, which happens to be oxytocin. So those of you who are aware of oxytocin and what it does, it is the bonding hormone, it is the love hormone. And so we're ready to be together with people, and we're feeling good about it. We're ready to bond with them when we feel safe in a human environment. So the togetherness of the mindfulness group is a physiological fact. Like I said, it's a real place. Things are happening. Pheromones are in the air. Hormones are being released. This is why I'm not so big on computer-based mindfulness programs. I think we get something out of being in the same room together. We get something out of being able to see all the faces. It's different than seeing all the faces on Zoom in the little blocks, which I was doing yesterday, trying to do the seminar. So, when we're feeling that way, when we're feeling open, when we're feeling hospitable, if you will, open towards the other, it's easier to roll out the welcome. It's easier to actually be mindful in the way that we want to define it with that non-judgmentally and all that that means at the end. Then there's the fact that in a group, we're steeping in that over and over again. We're learning how to do that. We're learning how to be together and to create a space in which we feel safe, a space in which we roll out our welcome mat, however that looks. So that's kind of the starting point here. So then I keep saying that we're learning it, but we're really not learning it. I mean, this idea of Ken Gergen's of potential, I think that we're gathering this potential, we're getting this potential in us. And so you heard what I just said, gathering this potential in us. There's an anthropologist who's really interesting and kind of a hot scholar. His name's Tim Ingold. And so he talks about, learning is a really not very descriptive and not very useful thing. He says, what's happening is that knowledge of the process, knowledge of how to do something, isn't located inside you, it's located outside you. If you're going to learn how to make an omelet when you're a kid, somebody's going to hold your hand and teach you how to break the egg. They're going to be with you and walk you through the process of turning the pan or however it is that you do it. So he says that you only get an omelet from a cook in the kitchen. You don't get an omelet from cognitive understanding. You get an omelet from actually doing it. Okay? So he says that we don't learn, we grow into knowledge that is among us. And that knowledge comes out when we're in a kitchen. Can't make an omelet other than in the kitchen. Right? So this is our kitchen. This being together is our kitchen. So one of the, there's lots of stuff that we're doing, and maybe sometimes we're getting to that place in our meditation together, in our mindfulness together, where we do feel safe. And we can roll out the welcome mat, and we can talk about the things, or have an inner dialogue. Inner dialogue doesn't seem quite right either. Ken Gergen calls it an unfinished dialogue. When we're talking to ourselves in our head, it's just us, and so he's saying that's unfinished. But maybe we can actually begin those dialogues, whether outer or inner, with what's really going on with us. One other thing that I want to point out is that the teacher in a mindfulness-based intervention is speaking differently when they're guiding practice, and they should really be using the same kind of language when they're in the dialogue with the folks in the room. Right? What's the language like? There are lots of ways of talking about it, and John Kabat-Zinn has some very explicit ideas, like we use the present participle, we say, so bringing your feet to the floor, blah, 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 blah. If you actually scrape all of what he's saying to the back of the hand, what we're really talking about is diplomatic forms of speech. And so Richard Sennett, great sociologist, been looking at how is it that we do things, there's a book called The Craftsman, and then how is it that we are together? And he did the Craftsman book so he could sort of really get underneath and feel how it is that being together is a craft, and his other book is called Together. His other book about this is called Together. So first of the three things that a diplomat does, so I don't know, I'm thinking that I'm a member of the November 9th committee here, and I'm thinking about what does it mean to be diplomatic? First, not insisting on one's own ideas, but instead taking the other's point of view. that's the starting point. Then he says, second, as much as possible, use the subjunctive mood. So, speak about it in language. What if, perhaps, I wonder. So, do you think this is how a diplomat would talk? I wonder what would happen if we did this. And so maybe in my guiding of the meditation, you noticed a lot of maybes, perhapses, if you want to, that kind of thing in there. So these are constructions that open up the possibilities for dialogue. I wonder if lets the other person talk. It seems to me that's a different phrase, isn't it? So, and the third is one that is close to my heart, which comes from Castiglione's book of the courtier, which is sprezzatura. So sprezzatura is a lightness of touch, making things not really count so much, having a joking quality to what it is that you're saying and how you're trying to get your point over if you're thinking of it. So that lightness of touch, I think, is really important. And in a mindfulness-based intervention classroom where people are, they're there because they're struggling with something in their lives. Bringing that lightness of touch is really important. If it's heavy all the time, you sort of find it hard to take. Man cannot bear too much reality. Real good, if I remember correctly. But when people in these groups are steeping in these kinds of skills, they're steeping in a different form of language than they've been in before. So, if we're going to go with Tim and say, I'm learning how to do this in a group, or this is coming to me to be part of me in a group, and it can be expressed in another group. I get an omelet from a cook in a kitchen. Hey, I'm going to encounter people differently after 8 weeks of hearing somebody say, perhaps, maybe, I wonder, what if? Maybe we start to think that way. Maybe we start to talk that way. What if this? I wonder. So now we're at the crux of our consideration. So is it possible that the potentials that we're infusing here can be useful in construction of other groups, organizations, etc.? So I just want to say that I picked up a book by Paul and Percival Goodman. You guys all probably know Paul Goodman. He did a book on community, and he did it with his brother Percival, who was an architect, which I found really interesting because I'm interested in, the architectural volume in which we do these things. He's looking at communities, what happens with communities. His favorite communities are intentional communities. He's writing this in 1960. And one of the communities that he's looking at is Black Mountain College. I don't know if any of you know Black Mountain College. It was an experiment in arts-based higher education. It was around from the 30s until 58 or 59. And it blew up, it blew apart. They just couldn't be that way anymore. They were sort of a completely democratic place where the students and the professors cooked the meals, cleaned the places up, did the clerical work, did all that kind of stuff. It actually took place on the grounds of a Christian summer camp And so when they came back in the fall, they had to move everything and start over. And when they wanted another building, they had to design it and build it. And so they did that. So they're just working together in this way. And you can see that a lot of potentials come out of this. Google Black Mountain College and take a look at the list of amazing people in our history, amazing people from the mid-century that came out of there. They're just famous name after famous name after famous. Transformative experience for them. And what Paul Goodman says, disintegrating when these places like Black Mountain College disintegrate, they irradiate society with people who have been profoundly touched by the excitement of community life, who do not forget the advantages, but try to realize them in new ways. Okay. So, MBI classes are not intentional communities. Rather, they're the opposite. They're unintentional communities. People are coming together. People are being brought together to do self-transformation. But I'm suggesting that if we turn that inside out and realize the relational dimension of this, that something is happening on that community level. The community is a side effect of the intervention. Classes are naive to the building of community. They're not really paying attention, and we're not spending that much time talking about the group. Right? That's not what we do. So we don't remark upon it. So it's an unremarkable community. And it's an unintentional community that still, I think, can do what Paul Goodman is talking about there. So if we just think about, that was good, because that was a really dense slide. There's a So, as I say, I'm not used to lecturing about this stuff, so I need some notes. It's the best way to do it. So don't pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. So, what we're talking about here is this excellent form of friendship that Aristotle talks about. Friendship is kind of the highest virtue. In fact, it might not even be listed in the virtues. It's so high. When he was thinking through his Nicomachean ethics, he spent more time thinking about friendship than he did anything else. It's like 20% of the Nicomachean ethics are the chapters on friendship. So there's an image that he has right at the beginning of his discussion of friendship. He says, in travels, one may observe how close and dear every human being is to every other human being. So you think about a sea journey in Aristotle's time. Okay, sort of creaky old boat covered with tar, and we're going to go across the Mediterranean. And there may be storms, and there may be rocks, and there may be who knows what else, monsters. So think of what those people are sharing, how vulnerable they are. Just like a mindfulness-based intervention class, they're there because they're feeling vulnerable. They're there because they feel broken, even though we're not going to treat them that way. But there's a solidarity, sympathy, and like-mindedness that arise, which Aristotle talks about as this excellent form of friendship. So he says then that friendship seems to hold the polis together. So this idea of the city, is really what concerns the ancient Greeks. How do we have community, and how do we make it good? That's the big, big question, both for Aristotle and that's what matters. So he says friendship holds the polis together. Lawgivers seem to pay more attention to friendship than to justice. More attention to friendship than to justice. And then he worries that attempts at being like-minded creates outsiders and insiders. And once you've created outsiders and insiders, then you're into law and justice and you're moving away from friendship. So once you have your inner community and then those who are outside of it, you've got a terrible paradox. And then he says, and when human beings are friends, they have no need of justice at all. But when they are just, they still need friendship, and that which is most just is thought to be done in a friendly way, reflecting perhaps the possibilities of the ethical space built on this idea of friendship. Friendship in its excellent form exceeds justice. It's not just. It's a superfluity of benevolence. It is wishing the other well, and this is what the sort of Aristotle's definition of friendship would be, of this excellent friendship. So friendship is not you across from me, and I want what you have, you want what I have, and we do this dance so that we both get it. It's not about owning anything. What Aristotle says is that friendship is, I'm looking at the good. That is what I want, the good. And you're next to me and you're looking at the good too. And it's our mutual looking at the good, our being beside each other, that is that friendship. That's how the connection comes in. So if you start to think about the quote-unquote individualism that somehow is also a group in the mindfulness-based stress reduction class, we're all oriented towards this good of rolling out the welcome mat for our experience. We're, in the meantime, rolling out the welcome mat for other people's experience. And we're doing this physiological thing that's happening as well in groups. So the class is a gathering of these excellent friends facing their own lives and the good of that, which would be rolling out the welcome mat together. So we're creating something that's unremarked or unremarkable, and something that also was unintentional. It's not what we started out to do. And yet 40% of the curative factors are from that. So this was the idea of first order moralities that I was talking about. This is a Ken Gergen thing. So the structure of our being together takes care of itself. In the definite, people playing a game are a confluence. They know exactly what to do. This is my part in the game. This is your part in the game. We're going to do that. So that's like a mini first order morality. It's not, in the case of the game, it is written out and coded, but in a situation like this, it's not written. So there are good first order moralities and bad first order moralities. Organized crime units or organized crime communities have their own morality. You better not do this. You better not step over the line that way, or you will be disciplined, right? It's the same damn thing as we're running.
I was wondering, I have a question.
Sure.
If everyone's combining their ethics to receive a certain synergy within the group, and you said two people come in and they see the good, is there an entitlement within the group that one person will achieve more good than the other person? Or is it-
Two people, I was just saying two people because I was thinking friendship
No, I mean,
and two, but all of us together
Because there are
are
like,
facing the good,
because there are levels within each group of, like what you say, of ethics. So there could be, like, in achieving what one is one, like a weaker part or a stronger part. So there could be an outcome which is
There could be an outcome in
beneficial
which
for-
somebody steps out of the first order morality of the group. Yeah, it's quite possible. I mean, somebody might not be able to contain their anxiety enough to not act out in the class. Doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. And so...
Or even so that there could be one or half the class would find more benefit within the group than the other half of the class?
Well,
Or is there
I
such a synergy?
I mean, I think how much benefit you find, that's a different story than how we are learning to relate to each other. Okay, do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So, but this idea of what happens if somebody can't contain themselves, or two people have too much anxiety, they can't deal with it, what happens is they're stepping out of the first order morality here. Now, as the teacher, at that point, I need to, if I can't bring them back in, if I can't use mindfulness practice, if I can't use things that I do know how to do because I've steeped in these things for a long time, if I can't get them there, I have to come out of the first order morality too. I have to go somewhere. Where I'm going to go, I'm a social worker. I'm going to go to my social worker ethics. I'm going to say, okay, I know what to do with a person who is having a panic attack in my class. I'm going to do that. I'm going to be in a different first order morality, and so is the other person. We're going to interact that way. And I'm going to try it, come back and build up what we have again. So that, to me, is the ethics code part of this. You might not be a social worker when you're teaching this. You might be an occupational therapist teaching a class. You're going to go to, what do occupational therapists do in this situation? You're going to move from that. Because it is a professional position, and these are quasi or actually clinical situations. So, but when we're all engaged in rolling out the welcome mat, I'm feeling like it's another space that is different. Because the minute I treat you like somebody who's having a panic attack, I am putting myself above you in the hierarchy. I'm naming you as somebody who has something wrong with them, right? So I'm undoing all those things that I'm doing all those things that we don't do in the class, right? And I'm probably going to do something instrumental, like let's take some deep breaths together, or whatever, right? So we've sort of erased, and then we see if we can get it back. So then there is this paradox of community, as I was saying. You know, the more we define the community, it's really interesting that you can look at the group, see all this happening, and the minute you start to try to define it and start to talk about whether somebody's in or out, you know, the more defined the community becomes, we tend to want to be fused, and we tend to create others. We tend to other people, right? So it doesn't seem possible to imagine a community in which everyone is included in their otherness. It's very hard to not do that othering thing. I think that in the class, as it runs, without thinking of it as a community, that we actually manage to do that sometimes. That we actually do create a community in which everybody is there with all that they are. They don't have to conform in some way. The welcome mat has rolled out. The cosmopolitanism is going on. So this is what I'm seeing as something that might be of value. Okay. So Maurice Blanchot, in his book, The Unavailable Community, and there are lots of French thinkers from sort of the end of the century that have been saying things like this and thinking about this and thinking about it this way, really looking at this terrible paradox of community. Blanchot says it would be an absence of community if you had that, and so we could all belong to an absence, and that's what it would be. So the ethical space does allow for the singularity of each person to be expressed while there's a sense of belonging. The non-pathologizing quality prevents us from putting limiting identities on. Say, you're other. Say, what's your experience? The more we can hold that, granted there are times when we have to step out. There are times when members do step out and other themselves. The better we are and the better the group is at holding that, at keeping the welcome mat, the less likely that is there. The more likely we are to be able to maintain that community. So the non-instrumental quality also keeps us from making comparisons or competing with each other. You're a better meditator than I am. What a ridiculous competition. And yet, just saying, and yet, how much does that come up for you in your meditation? Wow, I wish I were really good at this. If only I were good at this, how much my life would really change, right, Chuck? Yeah, I'd be free. If only I were really good at this. So one way of thinking about the group and what's happening, and this is the teacher's role, stewardship. But the idea is that what's in the group is a big freedom. That freedom to be yourself, that freedom to have everybody with their welcome mats rolled out. And yet I feel like I belong. I'm my authentic self and I belong to the group. And we want to balance that with this neurophysiological resonance, with the feeling that we have in the group. And so when one of these starts to shift, the whole thing collapses. You lose freedom, you don't have any belonging, you don't have any resonance. Right? You lose the resonance, you don't have any freedom or belonging. So it's a balance that's not easy to maintain. The teacher can work on things mostly from outside to keep the group in its architectural space, in its place. This is why I like to sit in a circle rather than in ranks. And so that's not true of everyone who teaches these things. Some people put people in rows, but you know, your mirror neurons know what that person up in front of you is like. How many of you have had the experience of seeing somebody that you know from a distance, and you know how they're feeling because of how their body posture is? You see them from a distance, from the back, and you know what's going on with them. Oh, you're having a bad day today. Wow. You should run up there and say hi, right? We can do that. It's amazing. So no matter how we're sitting, but there's something about being in the circle. So to me, there's a power that's hidden somewhere in the group that makes the ethical space, that makes the unintentional community present itself. I think it's the affective tone. think it's how people are in place. So Blanchot suggests that any true community by which you would be absence is founded on the death of another person. It's a pretty intense thought. Founded on the death of another person. To remain present in the proximity of another who by dying removes himself definitively, to take upon myself another's death as the only death that concerns me, this is what puts me beside myself. This is the only separation that can open me up to the very possibility to the openness of the truth. So there's something very existential about opening to the possibility of the kind of community that Blanchot has in mind, and that I have. Clinical situations, the situations of the MBIs, are rich in the possibilities of these kinds of, let's call them sublime moments. Right? Terror, madness, and death may not actually appear, but they're not impossible either in those situations. And they affect the atmosphere. This is a deep place we're going. All the more reason for the sprints into work. All the more reason for being able to light. So, the aesthetic response to terror, possibility of death, is known as the sublime. So Edmund Burke is the first person to name it and talk about it that way in English. So we're actually going back to 18th century here. So he makes terror the central idea in his definition of the sublime. So it's the terror that we find in viewing overwhelming natural phenomena, storms at sea, the ascent of a mountain. Death is imminent, and yet I'm a spectator. I'm actually able to sit back and watch this happen. So I'm not in immediate danger, but that thrill of danger, that situation puts me beside myself, unselfs me. So when I am unselfed, maybe it's easier for me to roll out the welcome.
Excuse me, I'm experiencing an overwhelming natural phenomenon.
Okay. So the terror of the sublime has this possibility, paradoxical sense of pleasure. In an MBI classroom, you may witness a courageous grappling with anxiety from your chair, and that's happening in another chair, right? So I'm a little bit removed from it. The mindfulness practice itself creates that, what John Kabat-Zinn calls orthogonal rotation in consciousness, where I'm seeing what's happening with me slightly differently. I'm experiencing my normal panic attack, and I'm also able to see it, see how it is. So again, this is the rolling out of the welcome method. So these things don't happen all the time in a group. The more clinically sort of attended the group is, the more likely these kinds of situations are to happen. People will, when they feel safe, talk about what's happening for themselves. Talk about the pain in their lives. Maybe a physiological pain, maybe psychological pain, maybe relational pain. They will talk about it. They will confront it, and the whole group is involved. We've said we're sitting we're beside ourselves just that little bit into that sublimity. So we steep in those possibilities of being beside ourselves a little bit. So here's the thing that I don't quite know how to grapple with. So you guys can, wow. So what Edmund Burke says is that yes, there's the sublime. It has this effect on us. He says there's also the beautiful, right? The beautiful is a different thing. Beauty brings people closer together because they agree on the pleasure of the experience. The sublime connects people in this other way through terror, through the breaking down a little bit of the I, breaking down of the ego, if you want to talk that talk. It happens by facing the fearful situation together. It's really one of the big curative moves in the mindfulness practice used clinically. People turning towards and being with the situation that they don't want to turn towards and be with. And then they realize, as I do, wow, I can work with this. There are some possibilities here that I didn't know. Right? So, different than beauty. When a group is steeping in beauty, and also we tend to other the beauty situation, but we'll talk about that later. When they're steeping solely in the beautiful without the opportunities of experiencing the sublime, the power of our co-creation, the power of our being together is not so strong. We're not steeping in the same kind of existential situation. So, situations in which terror, madness, and death are hovering in the atmosphere, distinct possibility in the clinical forms of the group, in the applications of mindfulness in, say, business and education. This is less often the case. So the community building aspect is not so strong necessarily. So if it's strong, it's built on beauty and our sharing of that rather than on the really being dropped into our deeper self. Okay. So in some sense, it's a cheaper co-construction of mindfulness and it's not bought at the expense of terror. I think that this is why the literature is so filled now with, oh, the popularization of mindfulness is destroying mindfulness. All these corporations that are using it, all these people that are selling mindfulness are selling it out cheap. And mostly it's, well, you're losing the religious dimension, you're losing the ethical dimension. That's the big critique. That's the McMindfulness critique, to use my friend Ron Purser's term. So, there's mindfulness and then there's McMindfulness. And perhaps it has to do with the balance of beauty and sublimity. Beauty and sublime. So, everybody can feel good. Let me read you this Rumi poem. It's great. That drops in differently in a classroom or in a business than it does with a bunch of cancer patients. Different things that are being invited into the guest house. Different level of feeling. So, what are the potentials? How do we create caring and justice in a community? How do we avoid it becoming something that's sentimental, which again is the mindfulness critique, I think. And what is it about that maybe for our own benefit, I feel good, as James Brown would. And is this important to young people? So my questions are, how do we find sublime power in groups that aren't clinically oriented? Is that possible to build that? Or to put it in Blanchot's terms, how do we found a group on death in order to bring it to life? How do we conceive of meditation in a relational way? Do we need to teach meditation differently? What would happen if we were more explicit about this stuff? Would that destroy it because it would become more intentional and a more remarkable form of community? Or would it be possible to do something? And how does our individual practice have anything to do with our building of caring and just communities? So, begin. Start writing. How many blue books do you want? So those are my questions at this point.
Are we supposed to try and talk about them?
Whatever you can ask questions. You can try to talk about these questions. You can ask other questions that you have.
So I think the first one, the idea of something being a clinical need, I think when something is clinical, it just means it has a diagnosis attached to it, and the things that people come in for, like depression, anxiety, things like that, are universal.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as them being a need, oftentimes they're not always negative. So like if you read, like if we're talking about existentialism, a lot of like Kierkegaard, he would write, or like Rollo May would write, that anxiety and things like that are actually positive and are useful. So I think it's kind of a universal thing. So you can kind of go over those things with non-clinical groups, since they're probably very much present in them as well. And I think as far as the death thing goes, I think you could reframe it too as like, if you are talking about ego, or if you're talking about self and the loss of self and stuff like that, like death, like reading about reincarnation, stuff like that, you can think of it as like a death and a rebirth, stuff like that, or you can think about, well, who I was a year ago isn't who I am now, so in that sense there was a death already, and the people I'm with now aren't the same as they were before, so maybe you could kind of frame death as not so much like someone actually passing, but like...
So what you're suggesting is then sort of the creation of this idea of the sublime.
Yeah, because I think that can be just as frightening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that you actually just bring it up. Yeah. It doesn't arise naturally in the room because of who we are.
Cool. I like that idea. It reminds me of letting go of the person I used to be, letting go of the self that used to be, so the new person emerges. It's not such an undertaker's view of death. It's kind of a natural, beautiful view of death. That death emerges the new me, or the new moment.
I just remembered a cartoon that I have loved since I first saw it when I was just a teenager. It just flashed in front of my eyes when I was reading these questions. It was one of Robert J. Lifton's cartoons. And he makes these little creatures that look sort of like ducks, and they're talking to each other with some kind of a relationship. And this one of the little creatures says, "I just had a wonderful feeling. I am me." And the other one says, "You were wrong."
That's relational.
I'm not entirely sure where to begin because it's incredibly complex. Answering these questions happens to be what my job is right now.
Yeah.
And considering the microcosm experience of an individual practice and mindful being and what that can do for the power of the community, it might be helpful to just provide a tiny bit of background, because it's years and years of background of the community that we're trying to do this work in currently. It's a medical community family practice, behavioral health, dental, creative arts, all these. You can imagine all the ways that you'd like to see healthcare look, and this is the medical home that we're doing this in. So, but the community that we serve happens to have a very high rate of adverse childhood experiences, which, as we know, then leads to a significant degree of suffering later in life, and what that means for health, both mind and body. So the health home that's doing the work is implementing trauma-informed practice, right? So that we can be more compassionate caregivers. And that's no matter who you are, whether you're a teacher, medical provider, front desk, security guard, administrative, we're all engaged in this practice. And in doing that, we realize that the organization itself has a lot of suffering, right? That it has its own trauma and its own history. So you could imagine the Institute of Westchester, right? It has its own history and its own story and how it's been healthy and hurt at different times, right? So in the last couple of years, I've been working there for over 6 years now, so the community is becoming more and more open and understanding of what mind-body practice is and mindfulness-based intervention, just mindful way of being. They're more open to it, right? So now we're looking at and doing sincere work on how mindfulness can support trauma-informed care to support both the individuals, the organization, individual health, and community health. So incredibly complex, right? So learning to sit together and just be together has, we couldn't have like a pre and post because you just don't know what it's going to look like, right? So it's kind of like considering, well, that's just it. You just don't know what it's going to look like. But most recently, we just finished an MBSR course together. And we have regular sits, and then different staff members are now becoming champions and sitting together on their own so that the one person, me, doesn't have to be responsible for holding it. So really infusing it throughout. But what was really significant about this particular MBSR class, it was all people that worked together every day. And the hierarchy wasn't there because we were just there as people that are human and we suffer and wanting to learn and sit to be together. And observing and people sharing over the course of the years, and then this more immediate and intimate work that we've been doing, how this does affect us in a relational way, how it affects how we're able to do our jobs, how it affects how we are received by the patients and the community, and how that can help in their own healing and process. And what was shared at the end of the 8 weeks was just how powerful it was to be together, right? Which is often shared at the end of retreats or groups. I mean, I sit at a Vipassana every year, and so you don't speak with each other, but at the end you feel like you know each other intimately and deeply. And I still don't know what it's going to look like, right, in a couple of years, how this will affect the community. But it is helping our, not only just to deal with stress at work, for helping the patients in their stress, but be able to have very difficult conversations with one another. We have a lot of conversations around how all the isms, and particularly how racism affects the health of the community, because we're health professionals, and it's public health. And these are not easy conversations to have, but to be able to know the sense of safety that has really emerged from having mindfulness practices together has made profound shifts, both on how we handle it organizationally, with a sense of fairness and justness, and deep listening, to know when we're not listening, but also just the individual health and what it's like, just to wake up and approach what we have to do with as clear mind as possible. So I don't have an answer other than I have a deep trust in what it's doing for this community and what it's doing for, we're all here together today. So I don't know if that we need to answer the question how our individual practice can contribute, or because that's coming down to semantics in some way.
You're looking at the last one?
Yeah, well, I'm trying to help myself focus on what I want to share, other than.
Yeah, so I mean, what I'm hearing is that there is something in the culture there that allowed you all to have a mindfulness-based stress reduction class together in the first place. That's a threatening thing in a lot of communities. So already there was a different kind of community. To have people who exist in a hierarchy sit together and let the hierarchy go, that's, a function of the teacher. So, give yourself a pat for whatever it was that you brought to that helped that to happen. And then there's some kind of willingness. I mean, the way it gets framed for everybody. What is it that we're doing here? I had the opportunity to work with an organization, a mental health care organization that was implementing mindfulness, so to speak, throughout the organization. And in the first one, I had the president in the first core class, I had the president of the organization. And he was just totally honest about what was happening with him in the moment, and his pain and his suffering. And that really, I think, was one of the things that made it work, that made it possible for the other people to get in touch, to feel that safety, to roll out their welcome mat. So, what's really happening is this potential that people now have is playing out, or can play out, with other smaller groups and with other relationships in the place, as well as for me, the client, the practitioner relationship is so important there, that this potential be there.
And just so, yes, in summation, right, so much attention can be on, and as you shared in just studies about individual outcomes, but what's allowed for so much of the growth was the admission that not only for individuals in leadership and those that we serve suffering, but that the community as a whole has its history in suffering.
Yeah.
And that the culture wasn't
Yeah.
healthy.
Yeah. So talking about community doesn't seem to have gotten in the way of community. Maybe it's helpful in the way it was framed. So, I mean, that's one of my big questions, because what's interesting to me about these communities is that they are unintentional. The focus has never been, at this point, on intentionally creating a community. So all of those paradoxical, terrifyingly paradoxical things of creating others come up as we do. You're not doing it right. Therefore you don't belong.
The individual practice, I work at the Chester County Intermediate Unit, so the community is the educational community. And what I'm dealing with, individual practice helps me to stay focused, to be in the moment and think about what I need to be doing currently that matters. And to me, with what I'm being presented at work, executive function is a big thing, and it so happens executive function for students, half of it is self-regulation, and what do you do for self-regulation? You do mindfulness. So with what I do, I consult with the districts, and so I'm now in the position where I can be talking about mindfulness to schools and to educational groups. So just doing that, I know,
my individual practice, to me, I'm having this opportunity to be present in the moment and seeing opportunities to share information about mindfulness. The challenge for me and why I'm here today was to know the best way to go about doing that. And it's been really helpful to see the research side of it, so I can, because that's what educators look to. They fit into the, as you explained, the non-clinical. So I now know how I can present it to them so that they will have that buy-in. And the curriculum that is research-based to use with students, it's Mind Up. I don't know if you're familiar with Mind Up. So I'm going to take that vein and talk about it with them about how important it is. But the thing is, the teachers need to be mindful themselves in order to do the mindfulness with the students. So, you know, I guess I'm just thinking there's so many different pitfalls, but I don't think it's a reason to stop. So I think sharing that information and the curriculum being more physiologically based, that the students learn about breathing and how it affects them, the teachers will pick that up and hopefully begin to do it themselves. But I think how education then has turned into being able to be more sublime, perhaps, and what I've seen in some of the videos is, and I can't remember the speaker in the video that's used, but a study that was done in, I think, San Diego, where the school, it was a school-wide initiative to do mindfulness. They embraced it and took it to a level where the educational community of that school actually would try to send out positive thoughts for the community outside the school, for the gangs and the difficulties in the general community. So I think it is possible, and that seems to be a level that once that practice is developed and nurtured and that community develops and feels safe, then they were able to then consider others and send out those thoughts to the outside community. And then obviously the students in that school are a part of that community that hopefully at some point will raise up and make us more of a mindful culture. Mm-hmm. So, you know, who knows what 100 years from now we will be like. So, so anyway, I don't know if any of that makes sense, but yeah, I think we just all have to keep doing individual practice and sharing and being, and hopefully we'll all become mindful sooner.
I was thinking one word that all you two and have said is safety. And it seems to me that in both of the groups that you're working in, there's been a protocol of safety that has made a huge impact on those communities, where if you're going to deal with these issues in an ethical space that are sublime, you probably need that first and foremost. I mean, I don't know that I'm answering all your questions.
No. I'm not really looking for anybody to answer the questions.
But it seems like to me like if you applied that to all of those areas, you could really,
So we have the possibility of generating a space among us in which we can all be present. I mean, I think that's the point that I've been trying to make. Now, what we do with it, how it happens, how we play it out, I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, what it looks like in actual practice, and it's probably going to look different in every actual practice. How we do that, but I think the potential for it is there. And leaving those potentials so that when the unintentional community disperses, people take that with them. So you take that with you into the consulting room, you take that with you into the neighborhood, you take that with you where you go, into the classroom. And you're maybe able to start to bring it. I think the idea of, okay, but the teachers have to, they need to be bearers of that potential. And the only way to become a bearer of that, at least the specific potential that I'm talking about, is to steep in that situation, is to actually have been in that situation. Feel what it's like. Know how you break the egg, that if you hit it too hard, you're going to ruin the yolk and then you're not going to like how, there are specifics about it.
But maybe one of the things that makes you feel safe with the new idea of mindfulness that you're talking about, the mindfulness, is that it is at a level that everybody does feel safe, in that situation, because there's not a lot of the sublime going on.
Well, I think that the safety that I'm talking about is the safety that comes with that sublimity. It comes with the being willing to acknowledge the pain. And in McMindfulness, as they say, that part isn't really there. They're playing with the beauty of it and not down in the trenches of being human. They're not in the Kierkegaardian sense of the sickness unto death. They're not there. So there is something about a deepening, I think, that helps something. But I don't know.
Yeah.
Again, and I'm coming at this from 12 or 13 years of clinically being involved in these things with clinical populations. The educational population is different, and it's voluntary in the clinical situation. It's mandated in the educational situation, and that's a very different situation as well. Kids sitting in the room that don't want to be there. What's that do to your space?
I was thinking about the last one, the individual practice. Don's a friend, Bruce's a friend, Pat's a friend, Elena's a friend, Bill's a friend. Probably 6-7 months ago, I'm 3 weeks from retiring. I've been working for 42 years as an occupational therapist. And probably maybe June, July, I was thrown a curveball of a potential due process case where I was going to be part of this case. And the anxiety and the fear and the anger and the this is not the way I want to end my career. So my friends have heard all of this stuff. And then this idea well, I'm supposed to be practicing. I'm supposed to be, I did Zen back in the 70s, stuff. What do I do with this stuff? How can I be a friend to Don and Bruce? And my mind is going crazy, my mind's going crazy. I want to get out of this place. I never want to come back to this place again. I can't wait to get out, right? So then the due process case comes to fruition. And I'm sitting there in these meetings, 13, 14, 15 hours of practice of mock hearings and the lawyers talking to us, and I'm still getting this is what I went to school for, defend my profession, so all this stuff's coming out. And I'm sitting next to a colleague of mine who I really respect, and she has a disease. And I'm watching her underneath the table with tremendous anxiety. Her body is just shaking. And this is in the mock. This is in the mock trial. And the fear and the anxiety, and I just realized I was part of this. actually part of this incredible group of people. So like Elaine and I were not in that group, but, and that idea of like, all right, so what, how do I want to end my last couple months? So I kind of dove into this thing of the due process. And all these, now it's been like September, October. And just powerful emotions of the idea, like now I'm part of this group. So our due process group was not an intentional community. We were part of a diagnostic team, and now we're part of a group where every one of us individually had the potential to be taken apart in front of our supervisors. And just, again, fear, anxiety, the whole the vagal system, you know, was coming up. And then this sense of like, thinking of my son, thinking of my wife, thinking of my family, thinking about the whole, and this idea of just letting, like you made the idea of like letting go. And now, I don't want to leave my organization. I'm now writing letters, I want to come back as a contractor. But the sense of embracing this group and seeing, and people we're not doing mindfulness at my IU. People that I know of that we're not doing mindfulness groups. And I keep thinking, so what can I bring? So when I'm walking down the hallway, what can I bring to the person that I see that they're going into their office to do a job, and I may not see them again. You know, we have this thoughts that, you know, I'll see them tomorrow, I'll see them tomorrow.
So my question for you would be, did the other members of this group that was going to trial notice how you felt again? Did they notice that there was a community?
Yes.
They did. So they remarked upon it.
We didn't remark upon it, but it was that the idea that we were together, and it was terror. It was absolutely, so sharing that terror, because I've never shared that kind of terror at work. I mean, it's basically getting your paperwork done. Somebody's going to yell at you, it's going to end. But the idea that your own professional reputation or that could be actually challenged was just absolutely petrifying. So we did. So we kind of experienced that. So I don't want it again. But no, we were joking as our team. We said, now we can do this again. Now we can. So we can go.
Learn something.
We can go into this again.
You have potential.
So, yes, that's right. So.
I was just wondering, listening to you, and I'm sorry, I don't have your names down.
I'm Chuck.
Chuck and
Brandy.
I was just wondering if we just raised, or for me anyway, we raised my individual practice to a relational practice, because actually, as you were talking, I was having the gut feeling of terror listening to you express it, and I started to think about my own practice. For me, what mindfulness really is a misnomer. It's really awareness that arises from within, from standing out here or sitting out here or wherever I am out there, looking at whoever this is in here, and listen. I am in education, and I guess about 3 weeks ago I was down at the Penn Mindfulness Leadership Conference, and a group of teachers gathered at a break, and we were just sharing stories about people who are teaching mindfulness, and they're screaming at the kids who are not doing it right. I almost threw up. It's like, hello, there is no, if they're chuckling when they're sitting there meditate, it's a good thing. Just get their spotlight of attention back to where you're trying to get it. But, so I was wondering if this group setting is, well, I guess I'm on my way of conceiving with meditation in a relational way. It's because when you're sitting with other folks and you're opening self-truth best you can to what they're saying in the moment. Now you have somebody else out there who's reflecting ideas, thoughts, and new things into you. I was just wondering if that's...
Yeah, well, I think you have something that's stirred in you around this idea of what is a relational meditation practice, or what is relational about meditation practice, which we do. We wake up in the morning, we brush our teeth, do our practice. How is it that that's relational? And
I just see like every question with group in it and relation, which relation is group. And then the last one, communities, that's group. So each question has group in it. And I see it as, if you're alone in your house all the time, you can't go on like that.
yeah.
I mean, you feel like you want to be with people. And if you have a problem, you're like thinking, well, how am I going to solve this problem? And really the only way to solve a problem is to be with other people, because even if it's just one, because you can't really be alone in your problems. So, and then the death thing, like if you're with other people, if you have a death in your family and you're with other people who have deaths, that's how you relate, because you have to relate to other people that have death, that are dealing with it too. And then the meditation and relation, like if you meditate yourself at home, you're solving your problems, so then you can go out and help other people. That's how I see it, but it's like everybody's talking about different things, that they each have like their own way of living. And I feel like I see things differently, but
And we are born into relationship. I mean,
Well,
we are relational beings. We
well,
don't
too,
exist
like,
without them.
if you move somewhere, the way my life was, when I moved, I was so alone that I had to seek groups. And you seek a group that you have things in common with, so then you feel better because you're with people who want to be in that group that you're in that group for, too.
Yeah. So you feel that connection. And what I would say about a mindfulness group, at least the way they're constituted, is that you don't necessarily know everybody there, and they don't necessarily have a lot in common with you other than the being human part. And that being human part is where we can relate. That is the bridge there.
I'm just thinking of the power of individual practice and relative to the community and how it supports accountability. I don't want to offer the illusion by any means that all of the community that I work in is practicing. But even if, like you say, just the individual practice in the home then goes out to the community, right? And if you have a piece of a population practicing, right, and upholding a certain accountability and mindful way of being, understanding that we're not trying to change what we're doing, but how we're doing it. That the ripple effect is quite profound.
One of the things I've been thinking about is just getting real concrete about it, because every time we take a breath, we exhale. And for me, part of exhalation is letting go of, who I am, of what I'm thinking. And to me, like if I notice my breathing, I've had once I was terrified where I did freeze, and I've certainly had anxiety and fear. But I think one of the things that happens in a group meditation is this sense of exhalation, of just letting go and sort of feeling a sense of trust. And I think it's, that letting go that enables me to sort of take in the group. So it's, I'm just being very concrete about it in terms of, yeah. So.
I'm glad you said that because it kind of refreshed in me what my intention behind the accountability, that it's my own and letting go of the expectations of the community. Because it's so very easy to say, this mindfulness thing, like to make it simple. This mindfulness thing would be great for a community and we don't have a good vibe, right? But then it's very easy to judge the others that don't seem to be in line, so that it becomes very self and others. And if we are really tuning in, my breath, my body, my accountability, and freeing from the expectation of others, we're really listening deeply together.
Well, let's go of competition and who's doing the mindfulness best.
Right.
I mean, it doesn't matter. Yeah.
Could I jump in with this thought? Just, I feel like it would be remiss to let this opportunity go without thanking the people that I work with every day with autism on the autism spectrum, because they give me a different way to think about relationships and how they form and what they are. And again, I use the words autism guardedly. For many years, I've been very, very unhappy with having people having those labels placed on them, and I think as well we should be. But that particular community of people, as it forms as a community more and more, is coming back and saying, I want to be called autistic. I want to have these words used to describe me, which is a piece of politics. It may change over time as well. It's just really interesting and complex. So I just kind of wanted to throw that out there because I feel this revulsion to using a label. But the important thing is I think that there are relationships that look very different from those that we're accustomed to seeing as relationships. And it does very beautifully, very powerfully question what we think a relationship is and what shape and what form it might take. And as I work with people on the spectrum and their families now, I don't think that they are learners, I think that they are teachers. I think I'm learning a lot more from them than they're learning from me. And it all revolves around this understanding of what it means to be in a relationship and what a relationship looks like. And they can look very, very different from what our culture has told us. And there's a lot of people out there who are considered to be not able to participate in a relationship, not being asocial, one of those diagnostic criteria for autism. Our oldest son doesn't get expressions on his face. He can't read other people's expressions well. He can look at your face and not necessarily have neurons, and that's a whole other subject that I think has been overblown and misinterpreted. But he doesn't necessarily see what you're feeling by reading your face, and his face always has the same expression. Whether it's his birthday or whether he just got fired from the job, he looks the same. So there are channels of relationships that are closed. But I also think that on other levels, other channels of communication are more open. People just don't know to look for them. They don't know that they're there. And so people get tarred with these diagnoses that say asocial, doesn't want to communicate, doesn't like people, yada, yada, yada. So I'm just very interested in exploring, I guess, in my life, and I hope you all will be interested too, how different these relationships can look and how we begin to open out into them. He's never going to sit in a room like this for 3 hours.
Right.
So it's going to have a different shape and a different form. But to synchronize ourselves with someone who has 2 left feet, I think is a difficult maneuver to make, and we need to learn how to dance that dance of relationship with these folks. So I need to throw that in somewhere.
Thank you so much. The thing that most concerns me is this terrifying paradox of the other and community. And how do we work with that? And, what you're saying is, how is it that everyone can be in this community or be like, well, show this absence, you know, how is that possible? And one of the things that I've been playing with the individual practice side of it is to think about the other in the practice. And I don't mean think, and I don't mean doing a practice for the other. There's a whole lot of that going on. I'm not sure what advises. I think that a lot of compassion practice, loving kindness practice, those kinds of things are a distraction from the mindfulness practice and can possibly overtake it. And I say that fearfully. I think there's some ways of working with your regular practice of paying attention to your breath, if you want to do it that way, that brings the other in. And if you all have 3 minutes, maybe you can have an experience and then you can go play with it if you want. If you don't want, that's fine too. So maybe you could come into a comfortable position. Close your eyes or not. Maybe gravity helps you to come into the present moment and to come into this space. The architectural volume. The people within it. So dropping into what's here for you. And maybe you choose to rest your attention on your breath. Maybe you choose the feeling of your hands. Maybe you choose whatever it is that you're used to choosing. Just resting your attention. So maybe when you notice that your attention has gone away, you could see if that's you. Because we tend to think that it's us that's hijacking ourselves, and we become very inner oriented. What if that's just an other? That's an experience of the other. How is it that we meet that experience? What level of affect do we have towards that other? Is it possible to just welcome that other? So we aren't right by resting our breath someplace. The other isn't wrong in taking us off. What happens if we, I don't know, welcome, befriend the other? What would that look like for you? So do we meet the other and come back to to ourselves, friendly to the other, friendly to ourselves? Do we meet the other and feel welcomed? Do we go there where our mind was taken, our eye was taken, our intention was taken away? How do we relate to this being taken away in that way that Aristotle would say? Ultimate friendship with that. Excellent friendship with the other. So maybe you could take a deeper breath in through your nose.